Well, anything that I say now is not going to be like that was what was in my head at the time. If I say, well, I said I'm going to set goals and I'm going to sharpen and narrow my focus and I'm going to focus on what's right in front of me. That was not in my, but as I look back on the experience, I mean, this is what I was doing.
Welcome to Mindset Lessons on the Field. I'm Gina Cazazza, the author of the upcoming memoir, Training with a SEAL. Today's guest is a former Navy SEAL who was awarded a Purple Heart and Bronze Star of Valor. He was a platoon commander for SEAL Team 1. He has 2 degrees from Harvard. In 2018, he won a gold, 4 silver, and 1 bronze medal in the Paralympics over a period of 8 days and received the Best Male Athlete at the Games. In 2022, he added another gold medal to his collection as part of the 4x2.5 kilometer cross-country mixed relay race. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my absolute honor to introduce you to Dan Cnossen. Dan, thank you so much for being on the show.
Gina, thanks for having me. I'm excited for the conversation. Thank you.
I am really excited to have you on the show because, well, first of all, when I checked out your story, I mean, gosh, we're all about mental strength, and we're going to get into your story and the mental strength that you had to get you to where you are today, which is absolutely incredible. I had to have you on the show just for this main reason. I need to know the mental strength that anybody can develop and have to get them through really, really bad challenges that comes your way. Because, you know, I was listening to an interview, and one thing that you said was, I'm paraphrasing, it's not word for word, but you mentioned like you've accepted death, like you knew what you signed up for, right? And you were like, okay, like there is a chance I'm gonna die in combat. I've accepted that, but you never thought of the injury, right? And then we're like, and that happened to you. That is a hard pill to swallow. It's a hard reality to, come to terms with. So I'm really interested in exploring and understanding how you got through that and how you continue to get through that on a daily basis. But where I want to start is the beginning of when you knew you wanted to serve your country, and after high school, when you were accepted into the Naval Academy. You know, it took 4 years for you to go to selection to go to BUD/S. So I want to know, like, when did you know you wanted to become a SEAL? What was that like for you? And I want to talk about those 4 years of getting to the goal that you had in mind.
Well, I grew up in Kansas, and thanks for this inquiry into my background. I am proud of the fact that I grew up on a 5th-generation farm. My family came from Ohio. This is on my mother's side of the family, and the home I was raised in is from 1874, built in there. Yeah, not that long after Kansas was made a state. We have a barn, a couple hundred acres I was able to roam around on, farmland, and I would go on cool tractor rides. I loved being outside. I played sports. And I was also raised as a reader by my parents. I'm thankful for that. But I would absorb any kind of literature I could get a hold of on military operations, World War II, Vietnam, Civil War, World War I, read anything I could. And going from more literature to just popular entertainment reading, all of it, anything I could. I knew that I wanted to go into the military, and I don't know where this comes from, although my father had served in the Marine Corps for a few years in Vietnam, didn't ever pressure me in any way. His father was in the European theater in World War II. And so there is that legacy, but I just knew that this is what I wanted to do. I initially wanted to fly fighter planes, or so I thought. And that's how I kind of gravitated towards wanting to go to the Naval Academy, watching Top Gun and this sort of thing. But changed my mind, and I decided that I wanted to be a Marine. Still, though, would make sense to go to the Naval Academy. So I had this goal early on. Fortunately, by the freshman year of high school so I could stay on track for the 4 years in high school and do the things that I needed to do to be a viable candidate, get good grades, demonstrate some leadership. And of course, my natural interest anyway was sports. But I got into the Naval Academy. I also, in high school, was part of the Sea Cadet program. And for that, it's modeled after enlisting in the Navy. I went off to Great Lakes, Illinois, where the Navy has its real boot camp. And we're in Navy boot camp. We're in Sea Cadet boot camp right beside people going through Navy boot camp. And so I got that exposure. I got to go to SEAL training as part of the Sea Cadets. And that was 2 weeks in Virginia Beach the summer before my senior year in high school, where I got exposed to what Hell Week would be like if I were to ever go to BUDS, Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL training. I got exposed to missions and mission planning and sneaking around, and we got to shoot guns and do obstacle courses. It was, other than my borderline fear of the water, it was a really cool experience. But I didn't think at the Naval Academy that I would have a chance of getting one of the 16 spots in my graduating class to be selected for SEAL training because it's so competitive and I wasn't really good at swimming, borderline scared of the water. So by the end of my first year, though, I changed my mind. And this is what I wanted to do. I had my circle of friends. They wanted, for the most part, wanted to do this as well and work together to help each other out. For me, I needed just to get in the water, get more comfortable being underwater, swimming faster, and this sort of thing. So it was don't really have an answer as to why I wanted to do this, but I felt like it was the thing that I should be doing. It did not feel like a choice. And so I think that this is an organic thing coming from within. Of course, there's external influences, but you're trying to sort all this out. And I think I wanted to do this for the challenge. I wanted to do it because my friends, I wanted to be, part of a team. I wanted to be part of a unit where physicality is a big thing, and challenge and adversity, and it's small unit, and you're going up against larger forces sometimes. And so all of this, and then 9/11 happened my senior year at the Naval Academy. And so now this is going beyond just a challenge and a cool job. Is to, if I get through this training, if I get to go to the training, if I get through the training, I'll be part of the nation's response to those acts. It all formulated senior year at the Naval Academy.
So you mentioned there were 16 slots. How many of you were competing for those 16 slots?
I would say by our senior year, first class year at the Naval Academy, there were in the 40s, 45 or so who had gone through the process. And this process really starts the junior year, the second class year, starts with a mini BUDS screener to go to mini BUDS that following summer. So the summer between the junior and senior year. And it's important to put in mini BUDS. California, where BUDS occurs, and you go through, again, another sort of kind of similar to what I had done with the Sea Cadet camp. Only I was in high school back then. I wasn't in the military. And I'm shocked that they were letting high school kids shoot MP5s into the obstacle course, and real Navy SEALs were running us through this training. I'm shocked. I don't know if that program exists now. But anyway, mini BUDS was going to be a kind of a similar thing where you go through sort of a one night of misery that is modeled after Hell Week. You go through some other things in the pool and assessments and try the obstacle course and running. And then you maybe get to do some missions and sneak around and plan the missions and execute these missions. And then maybe some shooting of weapons and maybe even hanging out with a SEAL team to just get that experience. So that's the kind of the concept of mini BUDS. You have to try out for it to get to go from the Naval Academy. That's a screener weekend. Get to go to mini BUDS. The senior year, you would do a physical fitness test. That is the BUDS entrance physical exam. You get ranked with the members of the Naval Academy class who are trying for these 16 spots. You do a peer, well, in our case, peer evaluation of each other, ranking one another. I don't know if that continues. There's definitely an interview, and that is in front of a panel of SEAL officers and enlisted, where they mess with you a little bit to see how you handle it. And after all that is done, the SEAL panel figures out who are the 16 in this class of Naval Academy graduates are going to be. And you don't find that out until the beginning of the second semester. But again, 9/11 had happened in September. And so I'm getting the decision was happening 4 months later or so at January of the next semester. to see who. And when we knew based on the operations that were going on that if you go into SEALs, you're going to be part of the response. If you go to the Marine Corps Infantry, be part of the response. If you're going on a ship, or maybe not, but there were definitely there was a delineation between who would be going to war for sure.
How did it feel for you, like being one of the 16 members, and then what was it like for you going through BUD?
Well, I'll never forget this day. It's called Service Selection Day, and it's a big event at the Naval Academy, and it happens. Maybe they change it from time to time, but when I was going through, this is over 20 years ago, but it was a day in January, and I went in, and it was like you're getting called in the way my company did it, and other companies may have done it differently, but getting called in one by one to go to the company officers, who is a commissioned officer from the U.S. Navy assigned to be a company officer at the Naval Academy. There are 30 companies. My company officer was a service warfare officer. I went into his office. I won't forget this. And he's printing it out. I walk in. It's the service assignment for me. And the first thing he said is, you don't have anything to worry about. And I'm assuming that meant I got what I wanted. But then he showed me the piece of paper and it said Naval Special Warfare. I knew I was selected. And it was just this wave hitting you. There was doubt about, are you going to be selected or not? And then excitement. And then I found out the majority of my friends, people who I expected to get it, did get it. One friend did not, and he was crushed. And I think that may have been in part due to a poor choice of a major at the Naval Academy. He chose one of the technical majors. There were a lot of all-nighters for him and some bad grades. But most of us got it. And he, by the way, later on did get the lateral transfer into the community and is still in the SEAL teams. So it worked out for him.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was this big moment of excitement and all this hard work paying off. But then it's like, oh my goodness, I have to go to BUDS. This is intense. Like, I'm going to BUDS. I'm going to have to try L week. Will I make it? All this water competency. I'm going to be good enough for that. That was my big weakness. And so I need to get to work. And then later then we have to figure out, the 16 of us, which order we're going to go into BUDS, because we can't all go in one class. You have to kind of divide amongst multiple classes, and who's going to go right away, who's going to wait a little bit, and which people are you going to go with, and that has to get sorted out. But it was a big night, a night of celebration, no doubt. And it was pretty. I was on cloud nine for quite a while. So
you mentioned there's a fear, like the water. There's this, and phase 2 is all water, and there are some evolutions where like you're underwater and the instructors are messing with you, and you have to, go through those steps of staying calm and going through every single procedure to, pass the evolution. And I remember hearing the evolution and just, I have a fear of the water. And I love the water, but I have this fear of it. And I don't know how I would be like stay calm when, essentially I am running out of oxygen, and like, and breathing and all that stuff. So what challenges did you go through, and how did you prepare yourself and train yourself to be able to stay calm under pressure of a fear that you also had?
This is a good question. Most of it comes down to exposure, and I didn't have exposure when I showed up at the Naval Academy. I have the utmost respect for the people in the Navy who enlist right out of high school and go straight to, they go to boot camp, but then they go straight to BUDS, and they're 18 or 19 years old. I could never have done that, and I needed the 4 years at the Naval Academy. I remember at the end of the freshman year at the Naval Academy, there was a screener to go to Navy dive school, and they had only opened up 4 billets in my freshman plebe class, 4 billets to get to go to Navy dive school. And I tried out, and there were probably 80 people trying out or something. And I was not one of the 4 that were selected. And I did awful. The tryout was a process in a swimming pool with a snorkel and a swim buddy, and you only have one snorkel and you're sharing it, and the upperclassmen who are selecting us are going to come and take us underwater, rip us off our masks, all the stuff that you were talking about. It's not dive gear, it's snorkel. And I freaked out. It was not good. I was not one of the 4 even close to be selected. And so I thought, I have no chance of being a SEAL. But ultimately, I kept working on the water. I got more comfortable. And my senior year, I think maybe 4 or 6 billets opened up again. And I got to go to, and I passed. And I was one of a few, again, to go maybe dive school. So my exposure to what it was like on water, breathing, that helped me be a little bit more calm and buds when they get to the second phase, where you have the double hose regulator and you're given underwater problems by the SEAL instructor staff, and you have to examine the problem and make the appropriate response, doing all this while you're not breathing. And that can be tough. I actually did pretty well at it. And the harder thing for me was actually some of the stuff that occurred in the first phase to include life-saving, because in life-saving, you're trying to demonstrate proper life-saving technique to a SEAL instructor who is simulating that they're drowning. And in my case, I had, I think, a 250-pound football player from college. He's now a Navy SEAL, but he's wearing a dive belt, pretending like he's drowning in the water. And I failed the first time, failed the second time, and the third time, and I keep getting the same guy. And the third time, it was like a different day and the weekend in between. And so I had work to practice in a swimming pool on my own. I'm coming back, and it's like, you only get 3 chances. And if I fail this one, I'm going to get rolled out or dropped from training, major stress. So I had to nail it. And I had told myself, I'm going to drink half the swimming pool, combat training tank if I have to, but I got to keep his head. He's not even going to know if I'm using the right technique or not, but he knows if his head is under the water. So I developed my own kind of technique, and that ended up working at all costs, just keep his head above the water. But that was the most challenging. There was the underwater 50-meter swim. There was the drown proofing, all this stuff. And I had to practice. But I will say that it's exposure, and it's taking small steps. And each day you get a little bit better. Having faith in yourself. There was faith in the SEAL instructor staff. They're not going to actually let us drown. They have medical support right there. They do a very good job, though, of making you think that you're on your own. And if you pass out, you're passing out, and this kind of thing. And yet having faith that it's all going to be okay. I can stick with the procedure, stay calm, be more comfortable in this environment, approach the environment, this environment that's causing fear, with an open attitude and taking small steps.
Okay, so I want to ask you, how do you handle and get through frustration? Like, you weren't able to secure that first slot. You were having challenges along the way, right? And we all have challenges along the way to get to the goal that we want. So how did you handle and deal with frustration and doubt to keep your eye on the goal and not get down on yourself?
Well, there's the daily frustrations, annoyances, and the kind of thing that they tend to be fleeting. You kind of just either it gets replaced by another frustration, or the problem resolves itself. But at a deeper level, when you're talking about the frustration of a major goal, that's harder to get over. In my case, that was very tough to not get one of the 4 spots. And then, I mean, these were my friends who got it, but to see them the next year, they had the dive bubbles on, and I'm like, well, okay, there's still 16 spots to go to SEAL training, and these guys are probably going to get the 4 out of the 16 are probably, but these guys, they've gone to dive school and all this, but there were some spots for airborne school that opened up the next summer, and that screening process was not in the water. And when it's not in the water, I excel quite well. And it's running and push-ups and pull-ups and stuff like this. I can do that. And so we didn't have many airborne spots, and I got some of the airborne slots. So that was so I'm feeling like that's awesome. I got an airborne. There's other summer trainings you can do at the Naval Academy between the academic years, but it's limited, the ones that actually would pertain to like wanting to be a SEAL or to help with SEAL training. So to get airborne, even though I had to go to Army Airborne School at Fort Benning, Georgia, which is a miserable experience, for static line training, it was cool because it was like, okay, I've got jump wings now. That's like a leg up on the competition. And so, you got to have faith in yourself. You got to have faith that there's going to be setbacks. There's going to be deviations from the pursuit of a long range goal, and the realization of that long range goal is not going to be easy. The pursuit will be riddled with encounters with reality, and there's competition, there's setbacks, there's frustrations, all this stuff. I think you just have to, through action is kind of how you work yourself through this, and having faith in yourself and having faith in forward motion.
Now, you mentioned the mentality of SEAL training that helped you in your future from when you were going through really, really tough challenges. So I want to know, what were the lessons that you learned there that ended up helping you in your future?
When I went through SEAL training called BUDS, and then there's follow-on training, but really where you learn a lot of lessons about grit and suffering and resolve and teamwork is in the first phase of BUDS, really throughout. But I mean, when it really is tough is the first couple months, and continues to be tough, but for different reasons. But when you have the highest attrition, people quitting, that happens early on. And then there's that infamous Hell Week. And a week is just 1 week, but there are other weeks that are very difficult. And the lessons that I learned were when something's really difficult and it seems momentous, or like you're having to summit a major mountain, you can't be trying to look at the peak when you're down at the base of it. You got to just segment and sharpen and narrow your focus on what's right in front of you. Focus on, in my case, I was a junior officer, or try to be a leader. And when you're, I think, acting like a leader should, should be more concerned about the welfare of the team and how are people doing, checking in with them, because we have peaks and valleys within Hell Week, and it's this sine wave. You're riding high. You think, you have confidence, I can get through this. I'm feeling pretty good. Wednesday's around the corner. Let's do this. And then like 2 hours later, you're just like in the lowest of lows. Like, oh my gosh, it's only Tuesday night. When is the sun going to come up for Wednesday morning? Like, how can I get through this? I'm hungry, cold, or what? So-and-so just quit, and I thought he was going to get through. So you have these ups and downs, and you should check it in with other people. Like, how are you doing? Hanging? I haven't heard from you in a couple of minutes. You're quiet, or something like this. Checking in, being a leader, thinking about other people takes the pain away from yourself. So that's it. The point here is, when things get really difficult, sharpen your focus and narrow it. And sometimes it's a micro focus. Make it through this evolution. Make it to the next meal. Make it through tonight. I want to just get to the sun. I know I can get to when the sun comes up that next morning, even though it's only Wednesday morning. Whatever that case may be. And when it's really difficult, it might be, I need to just get through the next minute. I need to take 10 more steps. And then if I really need to quit, I can quit. You take the 10 steps, realize you did that, you do it again. Okay, under this law or under this flow. So that's what I mean by sharpening the focus when things get really difficult. And then you learn what it means to be a good teammate. And that you can't fake this in Hell Week. You are either a good teammate or not. And people know who's slacking off a little bit. You should all be carrying equal amount of the weight out of the boat, out of the log. But if you're slacking off, you can't fake that. And as an officer and a boat crew leader, that would be a mortal sin to just be slacking off and letting the guys. So I'm supposed to be leading, letting them carry my share of the weight. I mean, that would be just sacrilege. And so for me, I always thought, like, show up in BUDS absolutely in good shape with maybe a little bit of extra skin on me for some insulation, but to have tough legs and they'll just go, to be fit, because I don't want to have to tap into my mental fortitude until like a few hours versus someone who isn't in shape. They're having to tap into their mental toughness right away. Maybe for me, if I'm fit, I can go a little bit longer before I have to tap into it. So you learn about the importance of eating and fueling, and you start to appreciate sleep and how valuable it is. But for more than anything, though, the number one lesson out of Hell Week is that whatever your mind is saying you can or can't do, just know that your body can do a lot more.
You mentioned focus, and I wanted to bring this up to you because I was listening to an interview and you talked about having that focus, getting to the next minute, getting to the 5 minutes, getting to the next evolution and all that stuff. And it reminded me of why in my mornings, I do this meditation. And it's an 11-minute meditation. And I have to, I close my eyes and in the middle, that third eye point, I am concentrating on the color green. And let me tell you something. It's an 11-minute meditation. And 600 times I have to reshift my focus to the color green in the 11 minutes. And I always say to myself, let's just do a minute of just the color green. And it's I can't even make it to a minute. It's your mind, it gets you in all these different directions. So I want to know, is that similar? Did you have to shift your focus many times to that target that you put on yourself, whether it was the next minute, the next 5 minutes, the next evolution? And how do you shift that focus? How do you stay connected? And when you do go off track, how do you catch yourself to go back on?
These are great questions, and I can completely identify with your scattered brain. I mean, I try for reasons of calming and for focus training, I try mindfulness as well and tracking my breath. And I would assume you're not in major duress when you're doing this. I can tell you when you are, and maybe you've been in extreme pain, but in my own situations where I have extreme physical pain, your mind doesn't wander. It's focused on the pain. I mean, pain has this way of just focusing the mind. It's in other situations that are not as extreme that the mind wanders, long range thoughts, doubts, all this kind of thing. And I think meditation and what you're doing is a wonderful way to start to train your mind to be aware of its own wanderings. And they would call this, awareness of your own awareness. And there's a calming effect of meditation, but there's also this, it's called focus training, where you're trying to observe your mind. So your mind's trying to pay attention to this green space and it's wandered, but the more quickly you can notice that it's wandered, you bring it back. It's just bringing it back. And then it wanders away 5 seconds later. Okay, bring it back. But this training, the brain responds to this training. And so for lesser situations that are not nearly as painful, I think this can really help. And then, in extreme physical pain, there were times in Hell Week, and the night of my injury, I wasn't thinking long range thoughts. I didn't have doubt. It's just, you're just trying to get through this because it's so painful.
Let's go into out of buds, became a SEAL, and you rose the ranks, right? You became a platoon commander. And what I want to know is, what makes a good platoon commander? What makes a good teammate? And how did you develop good leadership skills to become a commander that is respected and listened to? And if you had any struggles or setbacks or any hard times that you leaned on to become stronger and better?
Well, I think to be a good leader and a good platoon leader in this context, to be a good leader in general, the number one thing is care about the team. And people know that. People know whether you care about it or not. It's not something. Now, if you naturally don't care about your teammates and you're a leader, I would question why you should not be doing this job. And but I think there's mastering your craft and technical competency and all this, and in some in a platoon, if it was one or the other, absolute competence as a platoon leader, total technical competence, but don't really care about the individuals, don't really just a jerk to them, and this guy, that's not really going to work. And if it's the other case where you really do care about them, really just genuinely care about their safety and well-being and their interests and all this, but you have zero tactical or technical competences, that is not going to work either. And so, I mean, I hope that the caring about people, but, taking care of the team, that mentality, I hope it's there. But then, working on mastering your craft and studying and learning, because the safety of the team, the execution of the missions depends upon this. You can develop technical competency. It can take time, but some of the teammate skills like selflessness and helping the teammate, giving extra time. If it's the end of the day and one department's not done, even though you're not in that department, you could go home. You're going to stay extra and help your teammate. Those are the kind of things, really want to select for those attributes versus the operator who is just incredibly talented, but no one can stand being around this person because just the mannerisms and the interpersonality is so rough. So I would say you select for good teammate qualities first, and then you develop competency later. And if someone can't handle it, then they're gone. But I don't think ultimately you can train people to care about their teammates in that selfless way. That's something people have it or they don't.
So I wanted to ask you this. I wasn't sure when, but I think this was a really good time to ask this question. You have something really special that not many people get to experience, and that is you work with teammates that would literally die for you. And you found that out, and you experienced that, but you knew that, right? It's in the SEAL community or in the Special Forces community, it's you have a bond with these guys that that they would die for you. And that's just not a saying. That is an actual literal thing that could and does happen. In the civilian world, it's not like that. In the civilian world, especially working in business or working with people at your job, there are people that wouldn't do that for you. What is that like? And how does that get developed? How can businesses and how can people that run companies or work at companies, even not in that top tier leadership role, can strengthen and develop a bond to have what you have and experience?
It comes from hard training. It comes from selecting people. And in that hard training, if you're not a good teammate, and being a good teammate means carrying your share of the weight and caring about other people and getting along with them and be, normal human stuff. But if you don't have that, your teammates, your boat crew are going to find a way to drive you out. It bring you to the attention of the SEAL instructors. You're gone. You want to have very rigorous training, one, so you can weed people out and keep the right people. But in that rigorous training, you bond. And the harder the training, the more you're going to bond. You're going to start caring about people and caring about your teammates, because misery loves company, but it does have this effect. And then it's ultimately, this comes from culture where you demand that people adhere to the values that you're creating. The value, foremost of which, is that the mission is more important than you. Your teammates are more important than you. So you set these values, and then in the culture, you demand adherence. And then you get rid of people who are counter to that, who are negative, who are self-centered. Because, yes, there's egos in SEAL teams, but ultimately in operations and when it counts, you got to know that this person has your back, and that comes through training, through situations where you're putting and drilling these responses. So it comes from all of this, but ultimately, where does all of this come from? Where does the recognition that training needs to be hard? Where does that come from? It comes from culture. That's the underpinning of it all. And in your question about how would companies, corporations develop this can be hard. It's a good challenge. I think about this. How would you couldn't even have a SEAL platoon in a remote workplace. This just wouldn't work. And so I don't have experience in companies that have this hybrid workforce or remote workforce, but you absolutely have to bring people together periodically, and you have to go through hard times. Hard times bond the team together. These hard times can be for real, or they can be simulated through training, but you opt to go do hard things together as a team in an offsite, hiking somewhere difficult, or go doing something that's a challenge, and you will find people are going to start bonding together. That's just how it's going to be. So that's what I would recommend companies do.
I want to talk about that really bad day you had in combat and how your team saved your life, and how they had 2 minutes essentially before you're dead, you're gone, and they had to react really, really quickly and stay calm and do what they needed to do to get you down that mountain, to get you in that helicopter, and the way that they acted, how they ended up saving your life, and that day that, essentially the old you died, or the new you came out of this. And I want you to talk about that. I want you to talk about that experience, if you don't mind. I know you talked about it 100 times, but for our listeners on the show, sharing that story, and also your teammates and what they had to do to save your life.
I don't think it would ever be routine for me to talk about that night. And when you talk about my team, though, it's actually the main thing I think it's worth highlighting is that I was injured on a turnover operation, which is something that happens. You can't stay on deployment forever, and there has to, unit has to replace you, and there has to be a transition, and like the right seat, left seat kind of thing, where you're coming in, you're showing them what's going on. Maybe they're not all here yet, but then there's a transition. There's only so many beds, so you can't have all of both units there. So there's this phase transition, and it was in this phase transition where I was injured. I had deployed to Afghanistan. I was a platoon leader. Most of my platoon was still in the United States. We were on a nighttime operation. I'm shadowing. I'm not in a position of leadership. And in the course of this nighttime operation, I was with a small group of people up the top of a hill. There was a larger force of ours down below. And just to get through, the story, basically, we're at the top of the hill. I stepped on a pressure plate IED, improvised explosive device. It went off. It was a large enough potential explosion to obliterate me instantaneously, but it didn't. And I was laying in the dirt, and I didn't know if any of the guys up there were okay. But next thing I knew, they were on me, and the majority of them were not members of my platoon. And so that's what's remarkable here. Like you said, I only had a couple minutes or 90 seconds to make it because I had a double femoral artery bleed. So they had to take immediate action. SEAL medic up there is applying tourniquets. He had to apply 6 of them, I'm told later. And that's really tough. Really tough, painful to go through that. We're compromised. So the enemy knows we're here. This is in the middle of the night and not a pleasant area of Afghanistan. So security is going to be important. And we had to get off to the hilltop because they're likely, and there were additional bombs up there. So you can't afford losing it. If you lose a helicopter in this situation, so the helicopter is going to land down below. The helicopter has to get all the way back from this airfield, which was a long ways away. And so time and fuel are going to be the essence. These guys were dragging me down the hill. They responded, in the way that they did, as you said, this selflessness, because when you think about it, I just met many of them within 48 hours. I knew one really well, others maybe just from before overlap, but some of them, you guys from a different team, I didn't know them. And they're putting their life on the line to try to save me. And they have a lot to get back to. There's this mission, there's all this stuff going on. And so for them to do that to me is a remarkable thing. And for me, my struggle was to stay awake despite the pain. I didn't do that. I may have been in and out of consciousness, but for the most part, I'm awake. I do remember this experience. It was brutal. I eventually got down to the helicopter, and then they got me on board, and it was a situation where the helicopter was going to have to leave the scene pretty quickly, even if they didn't get me on board because the fuel was getting so low. And it really came down to a lot of things had to line up for me to even be here today. But yet it did line up. And there were a lot of people who I can thank and should thank and would thank in person if I knew who they were. But a lot of people, from the pilots and the air crew to medical people at different hospitals that I was never awake for, to include Germany. I was there, and back in the United States at Bethesda Naval Hospital where I ended up. But I woke up from a 10-day medically induced coma, and I'd been out. I found all this stuff that had happened. Like they got me on the helicopter. I remember that. I remember seeing a light in my face, and then apparently I was flown back to the field hospital. The guys continued with the operation. They eventually came back from the operation. They cycled through all to see me. They were told I probably wasn't going to make it, but I did take a turn for the better. I was transferred up to Bagram Air Force Base, from where we had been operating, so up to the main hospital in the country. From there to Germany, you have to be well enough to be stable to be flown to the next echelon of care, eventually back to the United States. And all of this is happening. I'm in this medically induced coma. And then it's shocking to hear that I came very close to not making it, and yet I have no recollection of this. It's relatively simple. When I'm getting dragged off of the mountain, and it's sort of my primitive is stay awake. That's the fight. There's some willpower there. But when I was in a medically induced coma, it's sort of like I would say it's disconcerting, because the part of me that would rationally say stay in the fight is not there, and everything's happening at some other level. And it was like a black hole. It's just wake up, and I'm already back in the United States, and yet all this stuff had happened. So it's for me to dwell on that is it can be disturbing, but it's also just kind of amazing to even be here. And it's sort of like a second take on life, and that can be liberating. And to have this new perspective now is empowering, and to think that life, for every day that I have of it, on is a major gift. And for that, I think I'm a better person. I'm stronger. Always told us in the SEAL teams, that which does not kill you only makes you stronger. And so I came close to dying, but came out of it, I think, stronger.
I want to ask you what it was like you asked the question, like, do I have my legs? And, first of all, that's hard news. Like, like any news of life-changing event, that's very, very hard to, you don't know how the person's going to react. You also have your own emotions that you're processing as well. And being from the doctor standpoint, to give, that news to the patient, digesting that, hearing that and digesting that. What was it like for you? Because did you go through shock and before you processed what was happening? Like what was that like?
When I woke up and I found out that my legs had been amputated, and it wasn't necessarily a visual thing, which might seem weird. You think you wake up, your eyes open, and you look down and you see you don't have legs, that would be shocking. But that's not how I found out about it. And maybe as I was in the medically induced coma, I could process conversations that were happening I don't know, but I do remember I was, first of all, majorly disoriented in my brain. And I had a lot of painkillers and stuff floating around, and you're groggy and all this. And so I wake up and my lower body was covered with blankets. And I remember no one had told me anything. So I asked the question if I heard it. So I found out not visually. And the night of it, I didn't know either. When the blast happened, it was in the middle of the night. And so I didn't see anything. So there's never a visual awareness that this is now my new reality, but I heard through words that I'm a double leg amputee and above the knee and all that. I didn't really know what that meant, but above the knees, that's significant. for both legs. And I had a list of other injuries. You hear that, and it's surreal. It's hard to you can't hear that and then accept it all in one swoop. I mean, it just has to absorb, and that takes a lot of time. And then, meanwhile, I had a lot of mental fog and other issues going on, so it just took time. It took time eventually to accept this, and to realize that I'm not gonna wake up and realize this was a bad nightmare, that having hopes that there will be leg transplants and that I'll just have legs like I used to have, even if there are leg transplants, that's not what it sounds like. Just that the future is prosthetics. I had to slowly absorb that lesson. And once you absorb it, you can start to accept it, and then you can start to make some goals and move forward.
First of all, you find out, you ask the question, do I have legs, right? And, you have to accept it and process it, right? But also, you're in pain. You're going through 3 to 4 surgeries a week. Then these surgeries aren't like quickies, right? They're like 7 to 12 hours long, and you don't know if you're going to make it. And there's a lot of pain that you're also going through throughout it. So how did you shift your focus? How were you able to shift it to stay positive? And what were those dark days like for you? And how were you able to get out of those dark days?
Well, anything that I say now is not going to be like that was what was in my head at the time. If I say, well, I said, I'm going to set goals and I'm going to sharpen and narrow my focus and I'm going to focus on what's right in front of me. That was not in my, but as I look back on the experience, I mean, that's what I was doing. I was, if the pain is high, I gotta get through. I can't really focus on much else. Let's get through this. Okay, maybe I need to hit that pain relief button a few times. It's giving me some relief, or whatever the case may be. Get to the next visitor. Try to sleep tonight. The nights were the worst by far. I mean, it's alone in the room. I mean, in the ICU, you are checked 24 times, a minimum, once every hour. The lights never go off. It's so hard to sleep. It's never quiet. You have to be checked every hour, 24 times a day. And eventually it was in an inpatient room where I had my own room. The lights would go out, actually be dark. Things were getting better, but you're not able to sleep and just laying there, just being so frustrated and facing the night and just, I can't get up. And all this stuff is going on. Mentally, it was tough that I just looked forward, though, to getting in a wheelchair. And then I knew about prosthetics and all of this stuff, but it's like, at an intuitive level, you don't really think about running until you've, started crawling as a baby or something like this. There's a natural progression. And so for me, it was like to get into the wheelchair, and I am going to push around the hallways of this hospital. I'm going to be doing laps. I'm going to do 10 miles a day. I mean, it's going to, that's what I was focused on. And I realized, like, that is a long ways away, and I have no idea when it is, but it is going to happen. It's going to happen. And I want to get there. And I remember getting up out of bed for the first time and sitting up where my back wasn't touching the bed. And you're thinking, it's pretty easy to sit up. I have 2 people, one on either side of me, and they kind of gently let me go, but their hands were right there to catch me if I fell, and I fell. I couldn't even sit up unsupported. I had atrophied that much, and balance. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is going to be such a long road. I can't even sit up right now unassisted because weeks, maybe a couple months had gone by at that point. I'm going to walk on 2 prosthetic knees. This is going to be that could be discouraging and overwhelming if I ruminated on it too much, but it's like, okay, let me get in the wheelchair. Let's just get in the wheelchair. And I rigged up therapy bands around my bed. That could be some mobility and some exercise, but I think there's something here. Like, whatever mobility you can do, you do it. You do it every day. You look forward to it. You do it. And there, in that mobility is some psychological mobility that's movement too. Psychological momentum is developing and forward progress. And I think this is all tied together. At least it is for me. And I can say, I don't know what was going I can't remember exactly what was going in my head, but I can tell you two things. One, rig up some therapy bands around the scaffolding, my bed, and let's do arm work every day. Number two, let's try to get a wheelchair.
I like the fact that they were attainable and they weren't like super long term, even though it took you, like I think it was like you couldn't get out of bed for 100 days. You couldn't even roll over. I mean, that's insane, right? And like thinking about it. And, I think it was you got out of that coma, like you had a tube down your throat. You couldn't even eat or drink anything, and you had this burning fever and you were, you had a mental reaction, I think, to the pain meds that you're on, which, gave you these horrible nightmares. And long-term thinking at that point is not an option, right? And a lot of times in civilian life, we are very wrapped up in long-term thinking when we should be more focused on those short-term goals, those short-term thinkings, like to get us to that long-term goal. And it's interesting because, like, I'm sure for yourself, like looking back now where you're at, and winning gold medals and finding, this new passion, cross skiing and stuff. How does it feel now, like looking back to where you've come to where you were? And also, what advice do you have for us to, long-term goals versus short-term goals to get to where you want to be? And were there ever goals where you had that you decided to shift, like you set your sights on a goal for something and then was like, oh, I'm going to shift it to this new goal?
Sure. I remember thinking, I'm going to get my prosthetics eventually, and I'm going to get back to being in the SEAL team. I think people were telling me some unrealistic stuff about what amputees are doing. And certainly amputees had returned in the Special Operations Forces. Amputees had returned. I knew about a SEAL captain who was a below knee amputee. Now, he's missing his leg is what I'm thinking, but in the detail of it, he's a below knee amputee. Somebody's telling me a Green Beret has gone back and redeployed to Iraq and is an above the knee amputee. And he's still got a good leg, but it's so, I was thinking I'm going to return. The prosthetics are good. The technology is awesome. I'm going to return. And then and that was a goal. I'm going to get back to being as operational as I can be. I would laugh at this, how delusional this was. But at the time it meant something to me and it was organic. You got to go with it, right? And so, but I eventually got to the part of my recovery where I was doing physical therapy. I got fitted for the prosthetic knees and it was like day one, like as good as these could ever be. They will be nothing like the legs I used to have. And it would be completely selfish for me as a bilateral above knee amputee to try to return to the SEAL teams in an operational capacity. It's just not happening. Now I could stay in the community as a desk person, and I don't think I want to do that. But I was going through those machinations in my mind, and I started to set some new goals because goals can get you moving forward. Long range goal, things that you really care about. Be powerful sources of motivation to get you through a setback. In this case, a major setback. And if I didn't have goals, it's like, what's the point of even moving forward? But I had these powerful goals that were in the future, and now they've shifted and they become more about walking and running and becoming an athlete. I'm going to compete in some way. There's this thing called the Paralympics, and so starting to formulate these longer range goals. But then yet you got to kind of, okay, that's long ways out. Let's focus on, what's going on within a year, within 6 months, 3 months, 2 months. Let's try to work on physical therapy this week, and you're sharpening and narrowing the focus. When you say that companies are, I think if you're only in the short-term space and you don't have long-range goals, that can be a problem. Putting out fires every day and you not make time to strategize and think about purpose and direction, that's a problem. But I think at its best, you develop strategy when things are calm, and in a clear-eyed way, you can think of a couple years out, 3, 4, 5 years out, And then in moments of stress, you kind of have to develop this capacity to micro focus, and that can really help you get through major crisis, and when things settle down again, then you can reevaluate and see if after that crisis you need to redirect. And that's kind of how I see this. There's a tension between the long term and the short term, between the short term and the long term. But ideally, everything's in alignment. Yeah, and anything you're moving, the short term actions that you're taking are funneling in 100% alignment towards those long range goals. And I know that may not be realistic reality, but that's kind of how I envision it.
Now, when you started, did you ever, or did you have in the beginning, like this delusion of time? Because it's like things take a lot longer than we anticipate. And, we forget that. We're like, oh, this is going to be, we have this delusion of time. It's just, that's just how it is, and then you realize like, okay, this is going to take a bit longer to get there, but I'm going to get there, but it's going to take a little bit longer. And I have to give myself that grace period. Did you experience that? And if you did experience that, how did you stay positive and not frustrated?
Well, I would say doctors are pretty good about putting you back into reality. You ask a doctor, when am I going to be better? They will never tell you an actual time date, and in that kind of mentality, it's like, well, we're just going to have to see what happens, and start to incorporate that thinking. I remember, how long am I going to be at Walter Reed? How long does physical therapy take? And then it's always, well, it depends, and I was well on my way to recovery. Then I had a major setback. I had a major surgery on my abdomen. I had a colostomy bag at the time. I don't have it anymore, but at the time I did, it was causing some complications. There was a kink. They had to cut me back open vertically, 6-inch incision vertically across my abdominal wall. And I mean, a major setback, because learning how to walk, it all comes down to core and hip strength. And so I had just started running even, and it was a major setback a year and 3 months into my recovery. It's just like, when is this going to end? And so I got through that, and then they had to cut me open a third time to reverse the colostomy bag to take it away. So, but again, another 6-inch vertical incision across my abdominal cord. And so it was just setback, recover. And then eventually there weren't really setbacks, but I was there in that world for 2 years. When they say goals should be specific and measurable and realistic and all this, I forget the A and T stand for timely, maybe. I think there's a risk of associating timelines with long-term goals, because in the beginning, I wanted to run. Before that, it makes sense to walk, but I want to get out of this hospital, but I don't know when this is going to be. And if I say I am going to be out of this hospital 1 year from the date of injury, that is my goal. 1 year out, that might get me moving and have some optimism in the first few months. But then what happens when that year point and an anniversary comes and passes and I'm still in the hospital? It could be defeating. So for long range goals, I discourage setting timelines with them. But specific goals are good, and organic goals are good, and goals that are yours. You could be influenced by them. You could take feedback, but there were people that would try to tell me goals, not so my goals should be what I could go do now, and therefore kind of what future I should be working towards. So it is kind of wrapped up with goals I can be setting. And I was thinking to myself at the time, how dare this person try to tell me what I should be doing when I want to walk and I want to run and I'm so glad that I spent that second year at Walter Reed doing proper physical therapy, because it set me up to be able to walk through a crowded cafeteria holding a tray as a bilateral above knee amputee. And if I skipped out on the physical therapy, maybe I wanted to develop those skills. But I graduated Walter Reed, so to speak, as a bilateral amputee who did not use a wheelchair, who could run, who could walk full time, and who could walk in difficult situations, at least function in a crowded subway, walking through a crowded airport, carrying a heavy backpack across my shoulders and this sort of thing. So that functionality was what I really was focused on, not so much career pursuits at the critical stages of being in the hospital. it was not where I was in my head.
Done a lot of different, from what I'm seeing, like I think you did like surfing and like you do outdoor, you love outdoors and stuff. And what point did you get introduced to skiing, cross skiing? When did you decide like, okay, I'm gonna go Paralympics? And did you have any frustrations? Did you have any setbacks? And how was this for you now to have this whole new life, like that you were now putting, giving yourself?
Well, I remember when we opened here, I was talking about my upbringing on the farm, and I was outside a lot as a kid, and I do get a lot of pleasure from being outside. If you can do the same thing outside versus inside, why not to do it outside? This is like in school. If you could have this class outside, why do the class inside? That's always been my mentality: is be outside if you can be outside. And when I was in the hospital, you can imagine what someone with this kind of mentality was going through, being stuck week after week. And I was getting frustrated at the nurses because I was thinking, why can't I just go outside? And I think I'm coming to the conclusion here that this is just a logistical challenge that somebody doesn't want to deal with. But it was like, this would do so much for me. And I just kept bringing it up, and I kept bringing it up. And eventually they wheeled me out into a courtyard, and it was like, it was a very emotional moment for me because I finally was outside, and I think it really was just this logistical hurdle that people didn't really, they just want to get through their day. But it meant so much for me just to be outside. I told myself I want to do something where I'm outside, and I want to be in nature, or all of this world is nature, but in places that are beautiful and be outside. And so when I found cross country skiing, it was like, this is the sport for me. I didn't have a background in it, but I did have a background as an endurance athlete, and that I could try out for a team in this sport where I'm in nature, away from traffic, in beautiful locations, mobility, under my own power, gliding across snow through the woods. Conditions are tough, and so to have mental and physical toughness to the sport, eventually racing, but in the beginning it was, this is just nice to be in the woods. And then try to make this team, train, set goals, work towards the goals, put the training to the test overseas in competition. It just made sense. And it felt like this is the one thing, the Paralympic program. I could compete on my own. I could run a 5K or whatever, marathon, whatever I want to do as a citizen. But to do it for Team USA, to do it where you get funding and the potential to represent the country overseas, there is a difference. There absolutely is a difference in the sense of purpose that you have in your workouts. And I gravitated towards that. And it was, for me, the one thing that I could do still professionally, or at least where I think this is my job, where as a person with a disability, it doesn't matter. In fact, that's what I have to have in order to be an athlete now, because you have to be classified into the Paralympic program. And it all just made sense for many reasons. And the biggest challenge I'm going to have is when I'm no longer a Paralympic athlete, because I got into it pretty quickly after rehab, and I've been doing it ever since. And I can't do it forever. And it's results-based. And so for me to be an athlete from ground zero, work physicality, progress, thinking of myself as an athlete, like psychologically, that made a difference. And so to be a retired Paralympic athlete, which is in my future, because I'm not retired yet, that is going to be my biggest challenge, to realize that, I'm not doing that anymore. I've been a Paralympic cross-country skier and biathlete longer than I ever was a SEAL. It's been a major part of my identity, a major part of my recovery and healing. The Paralympics began after World War II. They were started in the United Kingdom for injured British service members. And they recognized that especially for soldiers, but for anybody who has a major setback, that sport and competition is very healing. Art, music, education, other things, other avenues can be healing as well, but I think sport has a particular ability to heal.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So this was amazing. I have to ask you our final question, because I know we went over the hour, and I apologize for that. No, you just gave amazing answers, and I just had so many questions from all those answers. And I know our listeners gain value. So I have to ask, what advice do you have for our listeners, for myself, to get mentally stronger on a daily basis?
Well, it comes down to the choices that you make on a daily basis. And I would say, there's chosen suffering, and then there's the unchosen suffering. And the unchosen suffering seems to be some of the hardest. And you can choose to put yourself in situations, though, that are going to be difficult. And in doing this, attempting this challenge, training for, first of all, identifying the challenge, training for the challenge, and then going out and trying to do the challenge. And there's going to be some difficulty, maybe pain, maybe some suffering. At the end of the day, it's adversity, right? The challenges deals with adversity, that in the process of attacking this challenge, you're going to learn some things about yourself that are going to help you for situations that are unchosen, the unchosen kind of suffering. So you can choose to prepare yourself for these situations in life that are coming your way, that are just about inevitable, setbacks, challenges and obstacles, unforeseen events that are going to likely come when you least expect, from forces that are outside of your control. This is what I call unchosen challenge or unchosen suffering. So you can do things now to prepare yourself mentally for it.
Thank you so much for this. And thank you so much for being here. It was awesome chatting with you. I feel like I could have done it all day. It took up all of your time because it was incredible. So thanks again. And thank you for being here and doing this.
Thanks, Gina. I'm glad we had this conversation, and for those who are listening, it's amazing what you can do if you just set your mind to it. I know that's a cliche, but the way you look at a challenge, I think ultimately is so critical to how you approach adversity. The way you look at it, and there are many ways to look at a challenge. There's many ways to look at a setback. For me, in the beginning, I was looking at my situation a certain way, and now I have a whole new perspective because things changed, and the way that I was able to look at something made all the difference.
For everyone that is listening, please like, share, comment, subscribe. Become a Patreon member to get access to our bonus episodes, and I will listen and see you guys all next week. Thank you so much.